There's a couple versions of what happened that night.
So, my brother and I started watching Euphoria, and immediately, well, by the end of the first episode, the contradictory nature of the show's whole enterprise struck us. The gorgeous visuals, these rapturous glances into the teenage dream, clashed hard against the shoddy writing and sound design.
Jesus Christ, Maddie, I'm here with my parents.
Oh, it's the carnival.
No, it's the chili cook-off. It's very important. I can't have you hanging out at the booth dressed like that.
And unlike other shows, writing and sound design went hand in hand together, since the sound design, or lack thereof, exposed inconsistencies in the show's writing quality. That is, when the dialogue could be heard, because the mixing, despite there being no music, was atrocious. Throw in the lack of any score and you've got a show that might as well be watched on mute, a purely visual experience. Perhaps then it achieved greater success. Meanwhile, other shows of comparable quality take a lot of shit for similar criticisms. One in particular features a dynamic, retro-inspired look to the teenage mind, all within a similar pseudo-narrator's framework. Despite its weak performances, the writing's intentional camp, sometimes twisted into wit, keeps it mildly intriguing. Unlike Euphoria, this show feels like a fulfilled creative vision, one largely without compromise. I'm speaking, of course, about Riverdale. On the surface, comparing the two shows feels shallow. Beyond their teenage protagonists, little ostensibly links the two. One's about teens solving crime in a sexified middle America, and the other follows self-destructive adolescence in Los Angeles, or Orange County if the gratuitous shots of orange trees actually meant something. However, the way Euphoria positions itself as prestige, despite featuring unbounded ridiculousness, actively encourages the comparisons to Riverdale. After all, the latter's a show all about ridiculousness. It's the main feature for tuning in each week. They feature these unfathomable coincidences that somehow keep the plots of both shows not only afloat, but engrossing against better judgment. Though what separates Euphoria from Riverdale is its insistence on realism. Riverdale refuses to entertain such notions from the beginning. As early as the first episode, each teenage character, presumably 15 to 16 years old, were sexually defined in a way befitting the actual age of the actors, 25 to 29. A hot tryst between protagonist Archie Andrews and his music teacher informed most of the drama of the early part of the first season. Of course, the storyline is resolved unbelievably, with the students and parents aligning with this pedophilic instructor once she's outed. Yikes. Such is the extent of Riverdale's salacious depravity. It's about shock and awe, but reality is miles between the screen and the audience. Meanwhile, Euphoria assumes this is what it's like to be a kid today, sensationalist attitude that's meant to frighten ignorant adults. Others have called it a modern-day reefer madness, the anti-marijuana film produced by the government to curb usage of the drug by the youth. Today, Reefers is seen as perhaps one of the worst films ever made. It features blatant lies about the effects of cannabis, insinuating that its effects run the gamut from suicide to homicide. Consequently, these claims remain too outlandish to instigate any sort of significant backlash from cannabis users. They're too silly, not hard-hitting. It's a sound metaphor for Euphoria's impact, even if the consequences on display in the series seem very real. Euphoria tackles a wide range of abuses. Sexual, parental, pedophilic, spousal, relationship, drug, friendship, and even wealth. When there's a power dynamic in which abuse is possible, Euphoria likely has a plotline covering it. This causes a latent overburdening effect. The show tries to tackle too many issues to make any sort of intelligent commentary on any of them. Honestly, the show works best in commenting on the simple storylines. Case in point, Rue, the central character and narrator, the proverbial Jughead Jones of the show, suffers through the process of her sobriety. Her penchant for drugs, started by OCD-related familiarity but spurred on by her father's death, results in several near-death moments of the teenager. In order to avoid harming her family further, Rue gets clean, shouldering the burden of support on the already overburdened Jules, her best friend with a gay fetish and a fear of responsibility. Granted, this plotline gets pretty complicated emotionally, but it's downright simple compared to a few of the others, and it's really the most dramatic in the back half of the season. That's when Rue starts to romanticize Jules' role in her sobriety against Jules' consent or wishes. Jules is uncomfortable with that because she's involved in the hydra of coincidences known as the Nate, Tyler, Lex Luthor Pain Fest. The total absurdity of this troll's machinations soar with each new episode, beginning and ending with total disbelief. Nate's got daddy issues, the kind that comes from finding your dad's batch of sex tapes in a color-coded drawer. Turns out, Nate's father has a penchant for either underage boys or non-binary/trans folk. As a young boy himself, this has quite the impact on Nate's psyche. Compounding this with an unyielding, egomaniacal drive, presumably another byproduct of his father's immense success as a town contractor, produces a character more like a supervillain than a 17-year-old kid.
Go fuck yourself.
Nate plots 3 steps in advance, even for things he hasn't done yet. Example, later in the show, Nate assaults his girlfriend Maddie, pinning her against the wall by her throat. This prompts his expulsion from school while an investigation is underway, because Maddie, in a tragic twist, is unwilling to put Nate in danger of consequences. He gets out of this gross legal situation by blackmailing 2 other characters, one to take the fall, and the other to provide false evidence. Here's the problem. He started blackmailing these characters before he needed them to lie for him. In episode 2, he bludgeons a romantic rival, then threatens to turn him in for statutory rape. In episode 3, while catfishing Jules, he compiles evidence that could get her charged with child porn. The rival takes the blame for assaulting Maddie, and Jules provides a false testimony. Here's the thing, Nate choking Maddie was an act of passion, not a premeditated crime. The only rational explanation is that he knew he'd fuck up somehow and need the out. Few 17-year-olds think this way, and the ones that do rarely keep their pawns in line. Again, it's the type of plotting one would see from Lex Luthor, or maybe Loki, the cunning schemers of the comic book world. They exist in realms of heightened reality where melodrama is the norm. Euphoria doesn't. It's removed to a quasi-farcical version of California's suburbia, but the byline of the show is its hard-hitting look at teenage reality. However, don't make the mistake that Euphoria is for teenagers themselves. It's actually written with a 36-year-old male's perspective on today's teenagers, a vision largely informed by past generations of teens. This becomes especially clear in the pop culture extravaganza which is episode 6, the Halloween episode. To its credit, the creators capture a few of the zeitgeist oddities today's teens latch onto. One goes as a frightening realistic Bob Ross, who inexplicably maintains an internet presence despite playing for millennial children, not Gen Z. Another kid dresses up as Ted Bundy, a very of-the-moment reference to the infamous serial killer's reemergence in 2018. Culturally, not like in a back-to-life kind of way. With the youth's ravenous appetite for true crime docs and heartthrob Zac Efron, who played Bundy in the 2019 film Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil, and Vile, the costume was a slickly vile reference to the skewed media intoxication of adolescence. That being said, the costume the show chooses to focus on is inspired by Alabama Whitman, the female lead in 1993's cult classic True Romance, or, in simpler terms, a film no Gen Z teen has ever heard of. It's these pompous, ridiculous references that shatter the show's immersion. We notice that they stick out like a sore thumb, especially to those of us who haven't seen True Romance like myself or the writer of this video. Adding insult to injury, this is actually the writers doubling down as well. The same character who goes as Alabama Whitman watches the movie Fear, starring Reese Witherspoon and Mark Wahlberg, a few episodes earlier, a popular film with former teens that are now in their late 30s.
What are you doing? What is that? I recognize that. What is that?
Oh shit, that's from Fear, dude.
Oh, that's Marky Mark.
That's Marky Mark. That's what Marky Mark does. He does that, and then
Oh shit! And then the cops come in, and and then the police think that William
he gets
Peterson,
it.
the guy from
Go.
CSI.
She means business. She means
Shit,
business.
dude. Oh shit.
Similarly, when we look at the design of the show, it creaks under the same anachronistic pressure. Clothes are ripped straight from the late 2000s. Homes are designed with wood paneling and shag carpets that the 1970s have filed stolen police reports for. To a teenage audience, these hallmarks of bygone dead eras leave them anchorless. There's so little in this show that's attached to their own experience. It further reinforces the fact that this show simply isn't meant for Gen Z teens, or even their parents. It's made for a millennial generation that hadn't realized they'd grown up until it's too late. Coincidentally, shows such as Riverdale feature similar aesthetics while avoiding the same problem altogether. Again, the suspension of reality in that specific show allows Riverdale to play with giddy pastiche, informing its teen audience on these older references rather than assuming that they already know them. It's sort of like Baby's First Noir mixed with Baby's First Teen Movie. As mentioned previously, the fact that the characters feel more like adults helps. writers on the show nakedly indulge their own cinematic passions, which ironically makes sense considering Riverdale's source material. Archie has been around since the 1940s, enduring radical societal change and an unfortunate Christian buyout for a time, yet still maintained that same old-school allure. So, even the decidedly modern Riverdale traffics in grotesque melodrama, the show makes an effort to entomb those eras which Archie's lived through. Teens didn't sit around the diner drinking milkshakes or form bands on the fly to play variety competitions, but Archie did back in the 1950s. Alternately, teens didn't investigate homicides entwined in rampant small-town political corruption either, but the kids today love a good conspiracy. The point is, Riverdale's anachronisms feel warranted, while Euphoria's are accidental. It's the difference between using something the creators thought looked cool versus intentional placement. It's the difference between rote and evocative filmmaking. Another example of this in Euphoria is its occasional usage of 16mm film cameras, instead of its typical ARRI Alexa 65 digital camera. The 16mm sections are flat out gorgeous, easily the best looking sequences in the entire show. However, there's little motive behind when this transition to 16mm happens. Usually a shift in format belies a creative decision. 16mm might imply some sort of flashback, or perhaps a pastiche of old films. Admittedly, Euphoria uses 16mm for both these purposes, but then we'll just shoot random segments in the format. When Jules visits old friends in another town, the director switches to 16mm even though these scenes really only serve to introduce these new characters. Later, the show returns to digital to show Jules' night on the town, which was likely a practical decision due to the low lighting of those club scenes. Similarly, the show likes to pick and choose how they shoot scenes where Rue goes through some sort of emotional turmoil. If the scenes where she suffers from withdrawal or emotional breakdowns were filmed exclusively in 16mm or vice versa, it makes sense, but there is no consistency. Like much of the show, the decision to include 16mm feels like surface-level depth, an attempt to convey a deeper resonance without actually doing so. It'll leave the audience puzzled as to the meaning of it, even though there ain't one. A cheap facsimile of relatability that sequesters the audience rather than brings them closer. And then, the show ends. And as it turns out, it was all a waste. Everything said so far remains in status, crystallized motion. All avenues of development, the intrigue, the melodrama, the scandal, end at a stop sign. Caught in arrested development. That's all to say, the finale of Euphoria is not that. Instead, it regresses each character to where they were at the beginning of the show. So let's go through them sequentially, like a laundry list. You all thought this video was coming to an end. A mild-mannered virgin that went through the ultimate glow-up, possessing her sexuality in a way which invited the attention of undue pedophilic men. Boy, that sentence took a dark turn. Kat's arc ultimately proves especially frustrating because the show never realized what it was trying to say. Her sexuality flips between powerful and shameful. Naturally, Kat's whiplashing self-image sacrifices all consistency with her character. She starts off virginal, shy, then explodes suddenly with uncovered confidence when she has sex. This continues into a lucrative camming career, aka child, that spearheads IRL sexual conquests with 20-something-year-old men. Meanwhile, Kat develops a budding romance with Ethan, a kid she describes as a school shooter the first time she sees him.
Yeah, I'm Ethan.
Please don't be a mass shooter.
What?
Ignoring that pointed red herring, Ethan proves a willing, if inexperienced, crush for Kat, which she denies in the wake of her sexual prowess. For a while. Cue amongst guilt over an uncomfortable cam session, and you have a rushed, actually unseen, reversion to the same personality she had in the first episode, shy and uncomfortable. This happens in the last episode. A whole season's character development gone. Get used to it. Unlike other characters, Cassie ends up in a somewhat different place than when she started. In the first episode, we find out that she's dating McKay, a college football player that's friends with Nate, which causes him consternation because of her series of sex tapes that have been banded about the school. Granted, McKay's problematic as fuck sometimes, and Cassie's actually a kind-hearted, soft-spoken character. Despite the stereotypes which surround these slut characters, Cassie proves to have a strong emotional core. She undergoes tribulations which test her resolve, mainly temptations to cheat on McKay in an unplanned pregnancy that results in an abortion. Along the way, she handles the rampant sexism shoved in her face with aplomb. As it turns out, men view her as a conquest, not a full-bodied person. However, creating a full-fledged character like Cassie does not equate to development. She doesn't change throughout the series as, like other characters, events just happen around her. Additionally, the show withholds vital information about her until it feels tacked on, weakening its overall emotional impact. For example, Cassie's supposed to be passionate about ice skating, but she doesn't talk about it, and the character trait doesn't figure in until an out-of-place dream sequence during her abortion. While on the operating table, Cassie imagines that she's dancing in the ice because it's stylish? Cool? There isn't really a link between the aborted fetus and the ice dance. The creators just feel like there should be one. Cassie's storylines also typify the worst of the show's incoherent timelines. She flashes back often, but the editors usually cut to these flashbacks after another scene focusing on a character in the modern day. When this happens in the show, it feels like Cassie's flashbacks are happening in the present moment, even though it's obviously not. For a show that's mostly chronological, the editing often makes it hard to follow. So, back to the point, Cassie possesses the most potential as a character, skewing typical myths about high school sluts while commenting on the blatant sexism of boys as they become men. Unfortunately, the show couldn't thread the theming with the plot, and there goes Cassie's character. Oh, and her relationship with her parents is sort of fucked up, but that brings us to... Lexi is Cassie's sister, Rube's childhood friend, and naive moral center of the show. Unfortunately, it gives her little to do.
Jules, you're soaking wet and really drunk.
You're dry and dressed like Bob Ross.
Okay, I think we're gonna go.
Lexi's absorbed into the wake of not only Cassie's drama, but Rue's and Jules and McKay's and Nate's and Kat's and Maureen Ponderosa. Maddie's. We'll get to her later. Just everybody. Maud Lexi Judd is stuck in the abyssal nothingness of each main storyline without one of her own. While watching, we kept saying that she needs a Lexi episode, because she needed actual character to stand out from the other dysfunctional teenage nothings. The episode never came. The finale of the season tries to add a little depth to her character, but to little success. After drinking a tiny bit at the winter formal, Lexi starts making insightful, if insensitive, comments about the students around here. She jokes about Nate and Maddie's perpetually imploding relationship, as well as the unfortunate memories Nate's jilted date will soon form.
I thought this was gonna be like a night I'd remember forever.
Well, I think you will remember it forever.
Lexi then asks Cassie how to pick a boy to date, and that's about it. That's a wrap on her character. Per usual, more often than not, Lexi Maud Judd is a background figure, a glorified extra needed for occasional arbitration of various plot points. So there's Maddie, perhaps the most problematic character in the most problematic storyline of a show that is a maelstrom of problematic content. The end seems promising for her. She's on a break with Nate, which allows her to distance herself to realize its dysfunction. Remember, at this point, Maddie's romanticized the relationship to the point of Stockholm Syndrome. When Nate abuses her physically, mentally, and sexually, she identifies with her abuser, rationalizing his decisions as humane.
Just saying love is a million things. Sometimes it feels good, sometimes it doesn't. The one thing I know is that Nate loves me no matter what. He'd fucking kill for me and I'd kill for him.
The show actually positions Maddie as the villain for this, the witty accomplice to Nate's abusive lifestyle. That is categorically wrong. Maddie's a teenager that wasn't given the chance to learn about supportive relationships. This rationalizes her impulses to put down others in her friend circle, mainly Kat, who starts threatening Maddie's dominance. Cut to the dance, and Maddie's there with her friends. It appears that she's recuperating after a particularly nasty encounter in which Nate abuses her again when she asks if he's gay. Then Nate shows up, and she uses another man to make him jealous. It's a tactic we've seen before. Maddie does the same thing in the first episode. Of course, by the end of the dance, her and Nate are dancing arm in arm, cue the upset jilted cheerleader. So, what has either party learned? Maddie's trapped in an abusive relationship, one sanctioned at this point by law. She also knows that Nate enjoys lording his power over her, even though he's likely not even attracted to women. However, knowing these things still keeps her in the cycle of control and pain Nate inflicts, but the show, problematically, positions her in the center of it. Enough has already been said about Nate, that he's a sociopathic, unrealistic manipulator with the privilege to get whatever he wants. And he does, even to the last minute. At the dance, he discards his willing accompaniment, the cheerleader mentioned in Lexi's section, for the evening in favor of Maddie, always keeping the leash taut on their fucked up relationship. The previous episode, he ratted out the town dealer and close friend of Rue, Fezco, a miscalculation that could have cost Nate his life. Fez is caught up in a scary situation, the type which consumes pretty privileged boys like Nate, but again, nothing happens to him. The one person to stick up for herself is Rue, plaintively explaining to Nate that she'll end him if he fucks with her.
What do you want, bro?
I want you to leave Fez alone. I want you to leave Jules alone. If you ever fuck with them again, I'll destroy your life. I'll destroy your dad's life. I'll fucking burn your whole shit to the ground. Because I personally have no problem walking into any police station and telling them that Nate Jacobs' daddy likes to fuck little kids.
Nate shrugs the threat off. At the beginning of the show, he knew he'd get away with anything, and at the end, he knows the same thing. There's no character development, no plea for the audience's sympathy. He's just the arch nemesis through and through. Jules is an odd case. Her and Rue, as the central relationship, theoretically develop as characters. At the very least, we learn a fair deal about them, but that's not character development. Those are details, the cues which set the stage for change as a story unfolds. As it stands, Jules starts and ends the show in the same place, not Orange County. In the first episode, she causes a stir by arriving uninvited to Nate's party, and then harms herself to prove a point when Nate tries to bully her. Oh, and she's already fucked his very middle-aged dad. So we learn that Jules is an extreme personality, the type which draws adherents. Nate obsesses over dominating her, rising to the challenge, and Rue romanticizes Jules' necessary impact on her sobriety. This makes Jules understandably uncomfortable, leading to her gradual distance from Rue as she explores her own identity. To that point, Jules herself doesn't so much struggle as much evolve with her identity, as it's something that she's always been assailed for her whole life. She's already super aware of its impact. So leading up to the finale, Jules starts branching out to escape the unbearable pressure of growing up in Euphoria society. She meets old friends, experiments with drugs, hallucinates all manner of elusive fantasies, then comes back to Rue. However, it's with an ultimatum. Jules wants to run with Rue, get far away from the fuckery of high school minutia. Spoiler alert, Rue turns her down and Jules just leaves. Blown in and blown out, she catches the wind, flying away to another catastrophe. I guess that means she does change, but the fact remains that she's there and then gone. A temporal entreaty that ends with the reunification of the status quo. Rue, series protagonist, big name actress, recovering drug addict. These are the statements about Rue's character, but it's a testament to the strength of Zendaya's performance that she resists these simple modifiers. Whenever the show focused on Rue, it instantly seemed better. And for a show where she's ostensibly the protagonist, the focus strays from her way too often. To mediate her glaring omission from the time-consuming, overcomplicated storylines, the creators made Zendaya the narrator for the stories of the others. Here's the catch though, Euphoria does little to associate Rue with her peers. She isn't really their friend, it's more like she's in their proximity. There's no opportunity for Rue to study them, to learn about their inner machinations that make them tick. So when positioning Rue as omnipotent to their problems, it causes a disconnect between her character and her role on the show. Luckily, part of what made Rue interesting was her distance from the other storylines. When she would cross paths with other characters, it was usually only the intriguing ones, like Jules, Lexi, or Fezco. For the most part, the series tracks her postpartum uncoupling with drugs, then the unhealthy avenues she follows to replace their sense of, well, euphoria. Over the course of 7 episodes, she attaches herself to Jules, explores her budding sexuality, then crashes into a depressive low as she struggles with withdrawal from Jules. And Rue survives. She's a survivor, someone that, when drugs are removed from the equation, remains true to herself. It grants Rue an approachable grace, this understanding of the world which other characters can't comprehend. It's the reason she doesn't leave with Jules when asked. Jules wants to live in a fairy tale. Rue has to live in the real world. That's why it's so disheartening to see her break sobriety in the final scene of the season. Rue went through character growing pains. It hurts to see it happen, but she was one of the few to actually change throughout the series. Returning to drugs, followed by an outlandish musical sequence that 100% was included because she's Zendaya, left a sour taste in the mouth. It was the most frustrating moment in a frustrating finale. The finale hurt especially bad after the high quality of the preceding episode. Episode 7 featured endearing, clever sequences that economically conveyed information, as well as some powerful realizations for the characters mentioned. The last episode undid breakthroughs of the prior entry, eliminating the scant progress made over the course of the season. At the very end, Rue's back on her pharmaceutical shit, the same as in the beginning. So at its end, the show parts with a strange message that nothing will ever change about high school and everything sucks. And with that, we end the video. Thank you so much for watching, and thank God I never have to talk about this shitty show ever again. Wait, there's a second season?